we do and what we're doing in a few seconds here. Just going to work on sharing my slides to make sure these can come up. I'm also going to mute my video just so you guys can see my slides. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
I'm assuming yes, because I'm not getting, we can't see it. So sweet. Well, thanks for coming, folks. This is our solar presentation. This is the offering that we normally do out across the state, talking about the variety of options that we have in the solar market right now. And there is a lot of cool stuff to talk about. But before we get into all of the fun stuff, I'll go ahead and talk about who CUB is and what we do. So CUB is a nonprofit organization that fights the utility companies here in Illinois. So if you ever have a question or a complaint about your gas, electric, telephone bill, even stuff like, talking about what we're talking about today, like solar questions or general utility bill policy, whatever it might be, we're always there to answer those questions. Also, whenever the utility companies attempt to raise their rates or pass some legislation that's not very consumer friendly, we're the organization who goes after them. So we're on your side as a consumer advocate, as you guys are ratepayers. So as you probably gathered, our MO is helping folks out. And if there's one thing that you do remember today, hopefully it's a lot, but if there is one thing, it is that we have a consumer hotline, that 1-800-669-5556 number. That's open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. And again, if you ever have a question about your gas bill, your electric bill, you saw something in the news related to clean energy or decarbonization, whatever it might be, you can give us a ring and we're always happy to talk. And again, that's open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. We also have a really great website, citizensutilityboard.org. It's full of a ton of good resources and fact sheets that you can check out to keep yourself abreast of all of the things that are happening in the utility arena. And also all of the things that I'll be talking about today, there's most likely some kind of fact sheet, resource, or link on our website about solar or whatever it might be. So I'm a part of the outreach department. I spend my time in a lot of Zoom meetings like this one, but also in person. So I know the library is currently closed for in-person meetings, but hopefully we'll get to see you in person once that I think it's the construction is finished. But we do stuff both virtually and in person, and we do about 500 events a year all across the state. So we're running around like crazy because there's only a handful of us, but we love to talk to folks. We like spending time doing this. But after the fact of this event, if you are interested in taking advantage of some of our services, specifically our utility bill clinic, our virtual utility bill clinic, you can contact us at the UBC at citizensutilityboard.org email. What a utility bill clinic is we can analyze your gas, electric, telephone bills if you send them in there. So if you are curious about like whether or not you're overpaying, or if you have some weird charges, or maybe you're considering solar and you want to know if you're a good fit for it, you can scan your bills and send them into that UBC email, and we'd be happy to take a look. We'll get back to you through that email. We also have a ton of media and publications, which I alluded to this a little bit already. Our communications team does a very good job, I think, of boiling down complex topics related to our utility bills and creating fact sheets and guides in a way that folks like myself, lay folks, can understand them. So all of that is housed directly on our website. Again, that's citizensutilityboard.org. We also advocate for affordable and sustainable energy policies here in Illinois. So we have been exploring that intersectionality between affordability and sustainability because, for example, we just had a tornado touch down in Chicago. Climate change is something that's here and is real, and we think ultimately there are going to be policies that are being created in our state to address those. However, we think it's really important for a consumer advocate like CUB to be a part of those conversations to make sure that when we are thinking about this climate change legislation, that we're doing it in a way that saves folks money and is accessible, making sure that it's an equitable kind of package that everybody can take advantage of. So I think that brings us to solar. I think solar is a really good example of that kind of intersection. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive in. I guess I should mention there will be some time for questions at the end. But if you kind of want to bookmark your question, go ahead and put it in the chat. That way, if it's like something that comes up, just so you don't forget, you can type it in the chat and we'll go through questions in the chat first. And then at the end, we'll open it up to folks to unmute and ask those questions. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into the benefits of going solar. And I think there are 4 main benefits of just going to clean and renewable energy in general. The first one is environment, which I think is the biggest no-brainer, right? It's kind of the low-hanging fruit of moving towards more sustainable energy. It reduces our carbon emissions, and it also helps stop climate change. Like I was mentioning earlier, we're experiencing more extreme storms and weather. It used to be it was just out in California or on the coast, but now we're seeing it even here at home in the Midwest. So ultimately, moving over to renewable energy does help us reduce those carbon emissions. That ultimately helps us in the battle against climate change. The next one is something that I don't think a lot of folks think about, and that's jobs. So we passed some legislation that incentivizes a lot of the solar development that we're seeing here in Illinois. But the way it does it is that it incentivizes that development by incentivizing workforce development in economically disadvantaged communities. So communities that typically don't see economic opportunity or growth when it starts here in Illinois. We made sure when we passed those bills that we were targeting those communities to make sure that while we're growing this green economy, so to speak, that folks are able to take advantage of it who typically wouldn't get a shake at this particular industry. So jobs is a big piece of this. Health is also another big part of it. So naturally, fossil fuel generation pollutes, right? So switching over to sustainable sources reduces those pollutants. So things like nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter emissions are significantly reduced as we move over to more sustainable energy. And then lastly, which I think this is probably why most folks are here, and of course, it's that nice intersection again, savings. When folks move over to renewable energy or get those solar panels on their rooftop, you kind of immediately realize you greatly reduce your monthly electricity bills once you get those solar panels on your rooftop. And it's also a macro and a micro, right? If you're getting those solar panels on your rooftop at home, you're seeing a pretty big reduction on your utility bills. But also as we start to develop more renewable energy across the state, when you look at the energy markets, we find that solar, wind, renewable sources tend to be cheaper than their fossil fuel counterparts, which is pretty neat. So both the micro and the macro are at play here for savings. Then another cool piece is that it does increase the value of your home without increasing your property taxes. So getting solar does improve the value of your home. Zillow just did, well, they do it every year. They do a study where they look at how much what kind of savings or what kind of value you're seeing when you're putting those solar panels on your rooftop and what that equates to. And they find that it increases your home's value by about 4.1%. And then that 4.1% doesn't increase your property taxes, which is pretty neat. So let's get into some basics. So this is a solar irradiance map. So as you can see over to the southwest there, that's like New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, bright red, right? Orange and red. And that means that it gets more sun. So if you look at this sliding scale down here, the purple is not a ton of sun, right? And then if you slide all the way to the red, that's where you're getting the most sun exposure. So naturally, the Southwest is getting a ton of sun exposure. And that's the no-brainer places for solar. And we've been seeing solar in these particular states for several years. However, if you look at Illinois, we fall kind of right in the middle, which we find is kind of the sweet spot. You don't necessarily need to be where the red is to get efficiency out of your solar panels. So if you look to the right of this graph here, you have Germany, and it's all purple. The reason I bring this up is that Germany has the most solar per capita in the world. However, they do not get a lot of sunlight. So looking at Illinois, we get significantly more sunlight here. So solar does work in Illinois. I know that's always one of the first questions that folks ask when they're thinking about solar panels is, well, does it work here? Can I make it work in my own home in Illinois? We have gloomy winters. The answer is yes, because if Germany can make it work, where they're going to see about 80% of their total energy generation portfolio come from solar over time, yet they don't get a ton of sun, we can do it in Illinois here. So I think this is always a nice map just to kind of understand that we can do it here and we have enough sun exposure. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of things to consider if you are considering rooftop solar. So the solar window here in Illinois is 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. South-facing sun exposure is ideal. However, east or west-facing roofs can also work. So you don't necessarily need a south-facing roof, but if you do have an east or west-facing rooftop, it could require more panels, up to 20% more panels. So it would be a little more expensive to have solar panels on the east or west-facing rooftops, but again, you can make it work and it can be cost-effective, just not as much as if you had a south-facing sun exposure. Shade is the arch nemesis of solar. As you can imagine, it's the opposite of sun, right? So we don't like shade, and neither do solar panels. So things like trees, buildings, or homes that tower over your home that create shade during certain times of the day, to even like utility poles or like telephone poles, anything that casts a shadow on your rooftop could impact how much your solar panels produce. And if you do have a lot of shade, it could make it so it just might not make sense for you to have those solar panels on your rooftop, because it could impact the efficiency and the overall production of those panels. A good way just to see if your home's a good fit is visiting Google Project Sunroof. They have a nice tool that you can search your address. You can actually see what it looks like here to the right. There's the picture of all these houses, and it's orange and purple. That's how you can see how much sun exposure your home gets approximately. So you can go to that tool, search by your address, and then you can see if it would be worthwhile to start to think about solar panels. However, if you see that your roof is completely shaded, it might not be worthwhile, unfortunately. So there are some other considerations for roof mount systems. Snow, hail, and something called wind loading are oftentimes the big questions people ask when they're looking into solar panels. We'll start with the first one, snow. Of course, it's Illinois. We get a lot of snow during the winter time. Folks are like, well, if it snows on my solar panels, are they going to produce? And it's solar panels are generating energy, right? So they're hot to the touch. So if snow is falling on those solar panels, it's going to melt off. Even if it is a big blizzard and a big snow, over time, it might take a day, but over time, slowly that snow will melt off and it won't impact your production. So if you see somebody, for example, in your neighborhood with solar panels, next time it snows, look at their panels. I bet you if there's snow on there, the next time you look, there probably won't be. So it could take up to a day depending on how bad the snow is, but it doesn't necessarily impact generation all that much here in Illinois. Hail is also not an issue. So these panels are actually really brittle, the silicon that's used. So they're coated in really durable glass. So you can see here, the picture on the right, there are these two guys working on the roof. They, in some cases when folks are installing solar panels, if they don't have much room, they'll walk on the solar panels for a brief amount of time because they're that sturdy. And solar panels are actually rated to be protected against 1 inch of hail at 50 miles per hour. So they can withstand a pretty significant amount of a beating from hail. And then wind loading is a concept where wind could get under, or air could get under the solar panels and then make them balloon up, essentially damaging the solar panels. However, we don't find that that's a thing with panels, because the way that they're installed is there's only a 3-inch gap between the solar panels and the rooftop. So there's not enough room for them to go up and create a wind sail. So it's just small enough that the wind will just move right through and it won't push up and create that sailing effect. You do need to consider the condition of your roof, though, the age of the shingles. So if your roof needs to be replaced within 5 to 8 years, you might want to consider doing that before getting solar panels, because it'll be an additional cost if you get the solar panels and then you need to pay somebody to take them off your roof and then replace the roof and then put them back on. That can be an additional cost. So if you know you do need to replace your roof at some point, specifically the 5 to 8 year window, it's worthwhile to do that and then get the solar panels. Squirrels, surprisingly, rodents in general can also be a problem. So this is something to think about. So if you find that there are a lot of squirrels hanging out on your rooftop or hanging in the gutter, for example, you might want to consider something called critter guard, because squirrels will nest underneath the solar panels, and that's bad for the roof. It's bad for the solar panels. You don't want them chewing on stuff. But they make this thing called critter guard, which is essentially kind of a mesh wrap that wraps underneath the bottom of the solar panels. It's really hard to tell if somebody has it or not, because it's minimally invasive, but it does keep those rodents out. So they can be a problem, but you can get a pretty cheap solution. It's called Critter Guard. There's a couple other brands too. Some of them are like kind of like plastic gates, and then some of them are kind of like a mesh screen. But they can be a problem, so you want to stop those guys from nesting under your solar panels there. So this diagram here shows how solar panels work, like what's the process behind them. So you have this really cool looking sun here, and he's shining on the solar panels, and those photons from the sun essentially get absorbed by the solar panels, excite electrons, and create power that then flows to something called an inverter. So solar panels, when they're creating energy, they create DC power, direct current. whereas our homes run off of alternating current or AC power. So our homes and our devices, they all run off AC. So if you were to run DC through it, it wouldn't work. So you need something called an inverter that converts DC power to AC power so our homes can use it. So once that power has been converted to AC, it then goes through our home, right? It hits our meter, and then whatever we're using in our home is going to eat up that solar generation first. And if there's anything left over, it's going to spit that back out onto the grid. And then you actually get credited here in Illinois for any energy that you're producing and putting back onto the grid. It's called net metering, and we'll get to that in a second. It's a pretty cool thing that we have here. So let's talk a little bit about inverters. They are a very crucial part to solar installations. So again, they move that DC electricity to AC electricity so our homes can use it, but they also offer module level monitoring, which is pretty neat. So you can see there's a couple pictures here to the right. This is what it would look like on your computer or a tablet or a phone. And they individually monitor each panel on your roof, which is pretty cool because you can see what panels are generating, how much they're generating. You can also determine if something's wrong with the panels. So I like that they use this particular picture in this example here, because if you look down to the bottom right on the white tablet, it's the far right picture, you can see that most of the panels are generating 400 or more kilowatt hours. But if you look to the bottom right panel, the second to last there, it's only generating 64 watt hours worth of electricity. And that means that something's happening, right? There's maybe a branch that's creating a shadow, or maybe somebody's like flying a kite or something. I don't know. But there's some kind of shade that's on the roof that's preventing that solar panel from fully generating. And you could tell that because it's being individually monitored by these inverters. So they kind of serve a dual purpose. They can create this module level monitoring, but then they can also convert that energy, which is a necessary part of the system. You can also maximize your electricity savings using an inverter, because again, you could see how much energy you're generating at that point in time. Excuse me. You can see how much energy that you're generating at that point in time. And then if you needed to do a big ticket electricity task, let's say doing the dishes, doing the laundry, charging an electric vehicle, perhaps. If you see that there's a lot of electricity online in your home and you were to do that big ticket electricity task, you would use your solar energy and not necessarily take from the grid. So you can maximize the savings and the efficiency of your system by, playing around and seeing how much energy is being generated. You don't necessarily need to do this, right? You don't need to micromanage your usage, but it does give you that module level monitoring that does allow you to kind of play around if you want to nerd out and just try to maximize your efficiency here. If you have a battery, you can also monitor the settings of the battery here if it's compatible with the inverter. And then, of course, I always like to put contact support because sometimes things happen, right? And it's nice to have an online portal where you can easily contact a representative to troubleshoot and make sure things are cool. And if they're not, you can find a solution online. So it is nice that they have the online support with these particular applications. So if you have solar panels on your roof right now, 9 out of 10 times, you're going to have a grid tied or a grid direct system. What this means is that whenever you are generating that energy, you're tied to the grid, and anything that you're not using at the meter is going to be put back onto the grid. You get credited for that. The same is true as if you are not generating energy, let's say during the evening, but you're using electricity, you're going to pull from the grid. So you have a relationship with the grid still. So unfortunately, that means that if the grid goes down and you have a power outage, even if you have those solar panels, your solar panels are still going to go offline. And there's a reason for this. It's because if somebody's working on the utility lines, the electrical wiring out on the grid, and you are still generating electricity, you could potentially electrocute those workers. So ultimately, it's a worker safety issue. So that's why they need to kind of cut you off at your house so you can't keep generating that electricity and send it off onto the grid. And this is the only way that you can be net metered. So if you choose to do a system and you want to participate in the net metering system, you do need to be a grid tied system. So folks are probably thinking, well, what about batteries, right? What about storage? If the power does go out, could I get a battery to compensate for that? And the answer is yes. And there are a couple of different batteries that folks could look at. However, we find that batteries are still very expensive. It could add anywhere from $9,000 to $12,000 to the total cost of your installation if you're looking at a battery. So there are two situations I think it would make sense to consider a battery. The first is if you're in the boonies and you've got a cabin somewhere that isn't grid tied. There's no way for you to be a part of the grid except for paying the utility to come out there and creating the infrastructure for that particular residence to be connected. That can be super expensive. So, looking into a battery could be a good alternative in a solar system for that as well, because then you can become self-sufficient, generate your own energy, store it. Could be good. The other scenario is that if you're in an area that experiences significant blackouts and you need something like a generator already to compensate for those blackouts, then a battery might be worth it, and might be something to consider, because generators are expensive as well, right? A good one is. So if you were to get a solar system in an area where you do have those blackouts, it could make sense to get a battery. But again, it's really expensive right now to do a battery system. So it's definitely something to think about. If you are considering a battery, know that it's going to be a bit more as far as cost goes. So I've talked a bit about net metering, and we can talk a little more about it. So net metering, again, is where any of the extra electricity that you're generating, when you put it back onto the grid, you are getting bill credits back onto your bill. So Ameren, Illinois in general, is a 1-to-1 net metering state. And what that means is that whatever electricity you are putting out into the grid, you will be credited for that same amount on your bill. So some states in the United States do kind of a fraction to one net metering policy. So it'll be like half a kilowatt hour to 1 kilowatt hour. So you don't get credited at the full amount. But fortunately, Illinois is a 1-to-1. So whatever energy you're producing, you get that exact credit back onto your bill. So for every kilowatt hour you put on the grid, you get a kilowatt hour back on your bill. The credits do roll over from month to month, and they do expire in April. So it's a true up in April. The idea is that your solar system will start to generate more than you use during the summertime. So then when we do move into those gloomier months during the winter, you'll have a bank of credits that you can take from during the wintertime when your solar system isn't producing as much. But your solar system is going to produce year round. Even when it's cloudy out, you're still getting energy production. So the sun's still shining. It's just diffuse light through those clouds. So it's still picking up energy generation, just not as much as if it were like a clear blue sky shining directly onto those panels. So net metering will also never completely zero out your bill or eliminate it. That's something to consider. You are a grid tied system if you are participating in net metering. So you are taking from the grid. So you do have to pay, it's about $15 a month to stay in contact with the grid. So most folks who have a full-size solar system are only paying $15 a month on their bill. And again, it's just because you're paying the fees to be connected to the grid. So you can never get rid of that, but you can zero out most other charges onto your bill. So again, it's about $15 a month when you do get fully net metered, assuming you're fully generating to cover all of your usage for that particular month. So this is a sample bill, some fun 1-2-3 Homeward Lane Anywhere, Illinois, some creative town creation here by Ameren. But this is a sample bill with net metering. And I've highlighted in this red oval here where you would see your electricity use and then your electricity output. So it has read type, meter type, current meter read, et cetera, up there. But if you look directly under, there's total kWh, kilowatt hours, and then kWh, kilowatt hours out. So the total kilowatt hours is what you're actually using. So this mock bill, this consumer was using 1,297 kilowatt hours, which is under the current meter read. Directly under that, you have kilowatt hours out, which is your electricity output from your solar system, which it came out to 461 kilowatt hours for this hypothetical solar generation. So if you look further down the bill under usage summary in this oval, it has a few different line items here that are worth noting. It shows you, again, how much you used in total, what you generated, and then you have the extra, which for this person, their difference was 836. So instead of paying 1,297, paying for 1,297 kilowatt hours, they instead pay 836 kilowatt hours. But if you look to these two line items down here, I don't know if folks can see my mouse, so I'll try to better articulate it, but it's the last two line items here: supply prior carryover gen, and then supply carryover gen kilowatt hours. So what that is The first one, supply prior carryover, is what credit you had from the previous month of what you've had been generating from your solar panels. The next one, carryover generation kilowatt hours, is what you have currently. So it's actually zeroed out for this bill for whatever reason. It's just a sample bill. But assuming that you do have solar panels and you're banking some credits, that's where you would see the bank of credits. It's down there. All right, so let's talk about incentives and the dollars and cents of all of this. So there are some really stellar incentives in the state of Illinois right now. The current incentives can actually cover around 60 to 70% the total cost of the solar installation, which is pretty sweet. So we have the state solar renewable energy credit, or SREC, which can cover about 40%. That comes from the state. Then we have the 30% federal tax credit, which was it was about to phase out. And then the federal legislature decided to re-up that. And the 30% is going to last till 2030, which is great. And then, of course, we have net metering, which is always factored into this stuff. It helps us pay our systems back faster because you're not paying for that energy. It's getting zeroed out, so you can put that towards the installation. Few notes, though. Your homeowners association cannot block you from going solar in Illinois. Just important to know. Sometimes they do try to block folks, but they can't here in Illinois. Another thing to note is that the impact on your insurance policy does vary between providers. So most of the time we find it doesn't, they usually have solar policies and it doesn't have a big impact on it. But like all things in life, you just want to double check, read the fine print. So if you are considering solar and you do have an insurance policy taken out with a particular company, you should contact your representative and see if there's any like stipulations for solar into that contract. So let's talk about the SREC, Solar Renewable Energy Credit. So this is that payment for the green energy that you put onto the grid, right? So all of that energy that you're doing, the excess energy that you're putting back onto the grid, you're actually being compensated for that. So I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but CUB was instrumental in getting some clean energy bills passed over the past couple of years. And in part of those bills, specifically one called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which was passed in 2021, incentivizes folks to build out renewable energy, both developers and residential owners. So a lot of times when we're doing these big energy generation projects, right, it's not the average person who's getting a piece of that pie. It's oftentimes the folks who are building out those large generation projects. However, I think solar is pretty interesting because it flips that paradigm a little bit and allows homeowners to get a piece of that pie, right? So you're getting the incentives similarly to like what the developers are getting, which I think is pretty cool. And it's helping us meet our overall renewable energy goals. So we have a goal of going 100% carbon-free energy by 2045 here in Illinois. And part of those metrics need to be met by homeowner rooftop solar, residential solar, which I think is pretty cool. The way these SRECs work is that it's what your system is expected to generate over 15 years. And then there's $1 per, it's not $1 per watt of energy. It's kind of a decided amount, a decided dollar amount per watt of green energy. And then you get that SREC. And it's enough, again, to cover approximately 40% of the cost of those installations. Something to note, though, with SRECs is that they are taxable income. It's considered taxable income. And there is a processing fee. So a lot of times your solar installer will do the paperwork and all of the kind of like legal work around getting your SREC, but they oftentimes will charge a fee to do that. And it's usually about 10% or less than that, somewhere in that ballpark. So it is a decent amount, but at the end of the day, it's still, with that being said and done, still covers about 40% of the total cost, which is nice. So the federal tax credit is the piece that covers 30%. So this includes labor costs, system installation, interconnection, energy storage, or a battery if you decide to do that, covers all of those pieces. So the entirety of the installation, all covered within this 30%. So you don't get a new roof in it, right? It doesn't include a new roof if you did that, unless your installer says that your roof requires structural reinforcement. If that is the case, you need to do, I don't know quite what they would do. I'm not necessarily a technical expert, but if they do decide that you do need that structural reinforcement, you could potentially cover that in your federal tax credit. But we find that that happens only in rare circumstances. So it does exist, but it's hard to make work. So the home also must be owned by the taxpayer, but it doesn't have to be the principal residence. So what that means is that if this is a rental property, you can't get the federal tax credit. But if it's a second home, so if you're like snowbirding, for example, somewhere warmer, and then Illinois is just your home you come back to in the summer, you still can get the tax credit. You can, you need to be a resident at some point in the year in that home. If the percentage of the project cost is greater than the total taxes paid, it rolls over to the next year, which is nice. So if your tax liability doesn't cover the full 30%, whatever that comes out to, you can get it to roll over the following year. So this is the back of the napkin before and after incentives that we put together. I hate to give averages, but generally speaking, 6.5 kW is the average-ish system for residential rooftop system. Every home's different, right? Every home has different like shading situations, different usage habits. So the size of the system varies quite a bit. But we're just going to use this as like a very approximate average. So we did the total installed cost, which is the first line there, and we did it at $3.50 per watt, which is a pretty conservative estimate. Last I was looking, the per watt cost right now is approximately like $2.90, I think, for most folks. But I always like to be conservative when I'm doing these estimates, so we kind of shot it a little bit higher than normal. But that total came out to $22,750. So then when you apply the Illinois SREC, that takes off $8,000. And then when you apply the federal tax credit at 30%, that takes off approximately $7,000. So that $22,000 system fell closer to about $7,925 with all of those incentives, which is pretty nice. So what are your options for going solar? There are a couple. So there are three main ways to go solar. This is kind of the leasing versus ownership discussion here. So purchasing the panels outright is one way to do it. And everything that I just talked about, the incentives and how this all works on your rooftop, is specific to ownership of those solar panels. You can also lease the system or do a power purchase agreement. So you do have the option to get the panels on your rooftop without outright owning them. And then it typically falls into one of those two structures. So leasing is where you would pay a monthly subscription essentially to these panels to have them on your rooftop to get net metered to have that $15 bill. Power purchase agreement is where you would have those solar panels, but you would be paying a per kilowatt hour rate for the electricity produced by those panels. So they're a little bit different, but they're similar, where you wouldn't be getting the incentives. You would still have the solar panels on your rooftop. Your home would still be using that energy, but the payment is just a bit different. Generally speaking, we find that ownership is probably your best bet. So ownership is where you're going to save the most money. If you end up doing a lease or a PPA, you tend to pay a bit more through those compared to what you would pay if you were just to own them outright. So some things to look out for is that several leases and power purchase agreements do include cost escalators. For what we find, it's generally like 2 to 3% every single year. So it slowly steps up, so it can get pretty expensive. Again, like all things in life, check the contract, read the fine print, right? So whether it's general ownership of the solar panels, a lease, power purchase agreement, you want to make sure that you know what's going on with that contract. So like if you have a lease or a power purchase agreement, what happens if you move? Is there anything you need to do? What happens if the panels are damaged? Who has ownership over that? Those are the things you want to look at when you're checking that contract. We also highly recommend never sign a solar lease without first exploring ownership options. A lot of these companies that are going around, you've probably seen them door to door online. A lot of these companies are offering solar leases. They want to get those incentives and they want to get you on that kind of like monthly subscription that they're offering for a lease. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, you know, you're getting those panels, you're getting that green energy, but you're not necessarily getting the financial benefit of ownership. So definitely explore ownership first. See what it's like, see how much it's going to cost, see if your roof's viable for it. You know, it's up to you, obviously, if you want to do a lease or a PPA, but just be wary of costs. And of course, for all of these scenarios, always get 3 to 4 quotes. We'll talk about it in a couple slides here, but there are a couple good resources to check out some installer directories. So always talk to a couple people because you never know. One might be a bit more cheaper or a little bit cheaper than some of the other folks that are offering similar service. So there is another program called Community Solar. So Community Solar is a really, really good program for folks who might not be ready to do rooftop solar or might just not have like the resources, the space. Perhaps you have a shaded roof. community solar is designed for folks like myself. I'm a renter in Chicago. I don't think I'm going to be able to take advantage of rooftop solar for the foreseeable future, just because I'm a renter. So I would be able to take advantage of community solar though and still get the benefits of solar. So again, it's really good for renters, folks who live in condos, shaded people who have shaded roofs, and you might not have the best sun exposure on that roof. Community solar is a really good option. The way this works is that you would subscribe to a solar farm somewhere in your utility territory. So this is a like general breakdown of the utilities in Illinois. So in Northern Illinois, where I live in Chicago, we have ComEd. It's that red part. However, down in Bloomington, you're with Ameren. So there are several community solar farms throughout the state. If you, let's use y'all, for example, Bloomington, you would need to subscribe to something in Ameren territory, not necessarily ComEd territory. You can't do that if it's up in Northern Illinois. But even if it's like the very bottom of the state, close to Kentucky, you can still get that community solar subscription because it's in your utility territory. Just like to make that clear. Some folks are looking around, they're like, why can't I get into this particular project? And it's just because it's in the other utility territory. So how does this work? Community solar, again, is the solar farms that are being developed somewhere in the state in your utility territory. They're generally speaking about 2 megawatt systems, which are about the size of a cornfield, small cornfield. And these solar panels are then divided, or the solar energy is then chopped up and then sold back to folks like yourselves who are interested in subscribing to a portion of that solar garden. And then whatever portion you're subscribing to is then removed from your bill and billed separately through the solar developer, which it's a little confusing, but I think this graph here breaks it down and helps it make sense for folks. So the purple to the left, the purple area, is what your bill looks like without community solar. So you've got your supply, got your delivery, and you got your taxes and fees. In this hypothetical example, the total came out to $109 for this consumer. But to the right here, this is what your bill would look like with community solar. You have your supply, which is 800 kilowatt hours, but this consumer subscribed to 714 kilowatt hours through the community solar development. So those 714 kilowatt hours are removed from their bill. And if you look to the right here on the solar provider bill, and they are billed separately through the solar provider. So it's about $50 worth of energy. And then there's a 20% discount, which takes about $10 off, which comes out to 40 in this situation. So right now, every community solar development out there that's offering subscriptions is anywhere from 10 to 20% of a discount from the rate to compare of the utility, or the price to compare from Ameren. So whatever Ameren's rate is at that time when you're signed up through community solar, let's say you're signed up for the one that's 20%. If Ameren's rate jumps up when it changes, because the rate for electricity changes once in the summer, once in the fall. If it jumps up in the fall time, it's going to be 20% of that rate. And then during the summertime, if it goes back down, it'll be 20% of whatever that rate is. So it'll move with the default rate by your utility provider. And it'll always be at that discount for the length of the contract. So it's a pretty sweet deal. It's a guaranteed anywhere from, again, 10 to 20% on the supply portion of what you subscribe to on your bill. So it's a really cool way to participate in the green economy, to help foster solar energy, and then get some pretty sweet savings from it as well. So we have a website we put together on community solar. It's solarinthecommunity.com. You can also go to CUB's main website, citizensutilityboard.org, and kind of thumb through some of our resources. You can click on solar and then you find your way here. But solarinthecommunity.com, I think, is the easiest way to get there. I took this, it's a screenshot from one of the charts that we have on that particular website. And we have all of the different companies that are offering their subscriptions for community solar in Illinois. We have all the details laid out. So we have what utility territory you need to be in to subscribe to that community solar installation, what savings are offered by that subscription. So you can see some of them. I just took this 2 days ago. I pulled this from the website, and it's missing a few companies because I could only get it to be this big, but see, a couple of them are 10 and then 2 of them are 20%. You can see what the contract term is, if they have a cancellation fee, which right now none of them do. They do a credit check, how's the billing arranged, and then how you can contact them. So if you are interested in community solar, visit that solarinthecommunity.com, and then you could see what are the current offerings for the solar companies right now for community solar. So there's another cool program called Illinois Solar for All. Illinois Solar for All is a state-run program that allows folks to tap into solar energy, both rooftop and community solar, for income eligible households, nonprofits, and public facilities. So the way this works is that if you are income eligible, you can sign up for an Illinois Solar for All rooftop subscription, which is they do leases and power purchase agreements, which I know I was like, don't do a lease, don't do a power purchase agreement. That's for non-Illinois Solar for All solar. However, for Illinois Solar for All, those particular setups are actually really good because any outgoing cost or fees can't exceed 50% of the value of the energy produced, and there's zero upfront costs, which boy, isn't that some legalese. What that means is that whatever your solar panels are producing, whatever you're paying, let's say through a power purchase agreement, will always need to be 50% of the actual cost of the energy. So it's always half off, essentially, through an Illinois Solar for All development. So in order to qualify for Illinois Solar for All, you need to be below 80% area median income, which right in McLean County, that's $74,000 for a family of 4. The way you can confirm this is you can go to that Illinois Solar for All or IllinoisSFA.com link there, and they have a chart where you can search by your county and you can see what your area median income is. But if you're calling in from McLean County, it's about $74,000 for a family of 4. And that varies by household and size and region. So it's different, for example, in Chicago than it would be down in Bloomington. But you can learn more at the IllinoisSFA.com link. So here's some residential. So, well, there's currently one, I guess it's just the one residential solar for all offer through a company called GRNE. This changes. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 1, but right now there's one company that's offering rooftop solar statewide for the Illinois Solar for All program. And they're doing it through either a PPA or a lease. The contract length is about 15 years. And then of course there's a 0 upfront cost. So if you did a PPA through them, for example, whatever energy that's generating, you're going to pay them for that energy, but it'll be 50% of the cost of the actual energy. So again, a tap off. It's a really good deal. There's also community solar for Illinois Solar for All. And just like normal community solar, it works very, very similarly, right? You have like the normal electricity bill with supply, delivery, taxes, and fees. Look to the right here, you have your supply. This particular consumer subscribed to 300 kilowatt hours through their Illinois Solar for All community solar development. And then to the right here, they got a bill from the solar provider for those 300 kilowatt hours, but it was at that 50% discount because of the stipulation for Illinois Solar for All. So if you are income qualified, either community solar through Illinois Solar for All or rooftop solar through Illinois Solar for All are really good deals and worth looking into. So before going solar, regardless of the version that you sign up for, whether it's community solar, power purchase agreement, lease, just general ownership, we think energy efficiency is super important. You want to make sure that you are using the least amount of electricity that you can in order to maximize your solar panels, but also to pay less, right? If you're not being very energy efficient in your home, you're using a lot of energy, you're going to end up needing more solar panels, so it's going to be more expensive. So try to practice some energy efficiency before getting those solar panels to try to tighten up the ship as best you can so you can get a smaller system so you're not overpaying for that system. Energy efficiency investments have a 3-to-1 return, which is pretty nice. So for every $1 that you spend on energy efficiency, you get $3 back, which I think is pretty cool. I know I'm kind of pushing time here, so I'm going to move through some of these pretty quickly. Just glanced at my clock. Energy efficient lighting is a big piece of this. About 15% of our overall bill comes from lighting. So switching over to LEDs, more efficient bulbs can cut that down pretty significantly. If any big appliances end up going out or you're looking into newer appliances, make sure they're Energy Star, just means they're energy efficient. Weatherization is a big piece of this, stuff like insulation, weather stripping, all those things can really make a big difference and can, give your HVAC system a break during those really hot or really cold days. And then also consider just your daily electricity usage habits. So things like vampire power, which is power that's just passively being pulled from devices. So unplug appliances if you're not using them, can impact that. Utilize your programmable thermostat. If you're not already doing that, if you know you're going to be at work or school or whatever it might be throughout the day, turn your temperature up or down depending on the season, and then have the thermostat kick back on to the desired temperature a few hours before you get home. That way you can maximize your savings. You can also visit our website here, the bottom link down there, citizensutilityboard.org/EE_Ameren incentives. We have a fact sheet at that link that talks about all of the different incentives for energy efficiency in Ameren territory. It's definitely worth looking into. So how to find an installer? I think this is the golden question, right? After hearing all this information, folks who are interested probably want to know the best way to find an installer. There are a couple good ways to find one in your area. Of course, to reiterate, make sure you're getting 3 to 4 solar quotes from different installers. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but the Department of Energy states that you can save a couple percentage points on your solar installation when you do look at different quotes. They find that folks who don't, and they just go with like the first person, end up spending more than folks who are looking at 3 to 4 different companies. So Illinois Solar Education Association, or ISEA, is a really good resource here in Illinois. They have a residential installer directory where you can search by zip code and your address, and you can see some local folks in the area. You can go to illinoissolar.org where all that information's housed. There's also NABCEP, which is the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. And they maintain a very similar list of trained and certified solar installers that you can, they have like a list and a locator map that you can check out at that nabcep.org/installer locator link there. So it's very similar to the ICEA list, but it's always worthwhile to check both. And then lastly, kind of a pro tip here is that Illinois Shines is the program administrator, or rather it's the program that administrates all of the solar ongoings here in Illinois, and they maintain a consumer protection database. So you can see what complaints have been filed against certain companies. So before you go with a company, you can visit this illinoisshines.com/consumer complaint database link, and you can search your company in that database and you can see what kind of complaints have been filed against them. So that's a nice way to just determine if something, is weird with that installer, if they've had some issues in the past. That being said, I think that wraps it up for me. I'll keep this up for just a quick second. It's my email, mharvey@citizensutilityboard.org. Always happy to talk over email. And then, of course, we have that consumer advocacy hotline that's open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. It's 1-800-669-5556. That being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to come back on video here. And I am happy to answer any questions folks might have. And we will start with the chat, if that's okay with folks. Okay, so we have a question from Corn Belt. That is a good question, and I'm kicking myself now. I hate that I had to sit here for an entire presentation, but unfortunately, Corn Belt doesn't have the same kind of incentives that we do have in Ameren territory. I'm not super familiar with the kinds of incentives that Corn Belt offers for solar, so you need to contact their general hotline to see what they have to offer in regards to solar. Looks like Matthew Hartman also asked that same question. And Nandi asked, does the community solar farm have lease terms or a contract? Yes, if you do sign up for community solar, if you look at the different, here, I can pull it up again just so you can see it. See if I can find it here. I'll just reshare my screen real fast. So if you look here, you can see that they have some contract terms. It depends on the company, but some of them are like, for example, Arcadia is 15 years, Clearway is 20 years. Some of them are up to 20 years, right? So they'll kick you off after 20 years. But the key piece to this is that if you look to the right at cancellation fee, none of them have a cancellation fee. The only one that has something that's similar to that is Common Energy. You need to give them 90 days notice to leave that contract. So something to note as well is that if you do need to move, for example, or relocate, you can move your community solar contract with you. However, if you leave out of state or you leave to a different utility territory, so Mid-American or ComEd, you do need to relinquish that contract. But if you move, for example, from Bloomington to Peoria, you could keep that community solar contract with you. Andy, Corn Belt does not have annual retail net metering. They have monthly net billing, which offers the wholesale retail buyback, not retail. So it sounds like Corn Belt does have a different net metering program, or they don't have one that's similar to Ameren, unfortunately. But again, I think if you do live in Corn Belt territory, I spoke with my colleague briefly. He lives in the Bloomington area, and he did say that Corn Belt does have some kinds of incentives. You just need to reach out to them to see what they offer. But all of the information that I discussed today is specific to Ameren territory. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions they want to come off mute and ask? No worries if not.
I wanted to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I am in Ameren territory, so I hope some more folks were. I see there's a question about a copy of the presentation. This is being recorded and it will be on the library's YouTube channel probably tomorrow. So you'll be able to watch it anytime you want, starting tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. Much appreciated. And again, folks, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any clarifying questions. My colleague Marina is actually our in-house solar guru. She's out of town, so I'm filling in for her. But most likely, if you call Cub and you have any solar questions, Marina will be able to answer those and get in contact with you. And she knows all things solar. She's up to date on all of the latest and greatest. So she's always down to talk to folks.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Mimi.
Thanks, folks. Much appreciated.
Thanks again, Matt. See you soon.
Likewise. Take care.